Hello.
Good morning, Harry.
Morning. Hi, Brian.
All right. Let's wait one more minute, and then I guess we can get this show on the road at about 3 or after.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay, I got you.
All right. Let's get this show on the road. Just before we get started, just to let you know that this call is recorded. So anything you say, everyone will be able to hear. And if you don't like that, don't say anything. But today is, September 25th? Or is it the 25th? Yeah, today is September 25th, and this is the SIG App Delivery call. I'm Brian Lyles, and today my other co-chairs here with me, it's Harry. Say hi,
Yeah.
Harry.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. Thank you.
So 1 second while I pull up the agenda. Or Harry, could you pull up the agenda?
Okay.
Yes.
Sure. So I think anyone can see my screen here.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. Oh, should we wait for Alois to come? Seems Alois is not here.
Well, we have all these people on the call, so I will see if he shows up.
It seems he is missing because we have several items here that many updates from him.
All right. Well, let's get started with the application delivery doc, and then we'll move on.
That. Yeah. So the first item that recently the SIG is working on is a dictionary for application delivery. It's basically for expand or to make it clear for several essential items or terminologies the SIG is talking about. And we have already revised the documentation for several rounds. We have already received a lot of feedbacks from the community and have addressed all the issues. And then, so now if you read this documentation, you will see several definitions like what is application, what is application instances, etc. But please note that when we're talking about application or any kind of items here, we're not trying to define a general purpose definition for that terminology. We are just talking about, okay, what is the application we're talking about in this SIG? So the purpose of this documentation is not like as it's mentioned here, it's not like a white paper or something. It's like a tool or dictionary. So if anyone working on or working in this SIG, okay, if you are confused about several terminologies, so the first place you may want to look at is if it's already defined in this documentation. So I will give you an example by start from application. So we're talking about applications here and there in this SIG. So you may be very curious that, okay, what is application? So the application we're talking in this SIG is more like something about what we want to deploy. So it's basically a collection of declarative configuration of runnable units, which describes for the platform how to deploy, start, operate, and retire the corresponding service artifacts. That's all. So there's somebody that is asking that, okay, we are talking about a runnable unit. So do we have to assume that the runnable units should be microservices or not? Okay, so from my point of view, that it can be microservices, but it don't have to be, because microservices is a very good start if you want to do cloud native application delivery, but it's not a requirement, because we can also start from more traditional workloads like the virtual machines or just the Java web applications without a container. That's fine. That will not stop. That will still use a cloud native way to deliver the application, because I will explain this more a little better. So that is okay what we're talking about with application. We also have corresponding concepts like application instances. It's more like the runtime concept, because the application we're talking about is actually a static description of the application. But when it has already bootstrapped or have already deployed, we will have application instances. The best example of application instances is like, okay, if you have something like Kubernetes deployment with replicas in 3, then you will have 3 application instances which are all equivalent. But please note that it's not actually saying we must have 3 pods or 3 containers. It's just focused on the application instances level. Another example is SCD cluster, which is managed by operator with size of 5. Then you will get 5 application instances in that case. But in that case, the 5 application instances are not equivalent to each other. There are 5 individual SCD instances. That's all. And we also have concept like platform. The platform is what we use to run this application, which is the underlying system that provides the functionalities to manage applications through its lifecycle. The best example, of course, is the Kubernetes. But again, in this SIG, we're not saying you have to use Kubernetes or everything must be deployed on Kubernetes. It's not that case. We only focus on cloud native application delivery. So if you're using directly the cloud services or cloud infrastructure, that's fine. Or you may be using something like Service, Fargate, that's okay. As long as we're doing in a cloud native way, that means we honor the concept like in immutable infrastructure. We are using a way to describe the application like container or other packaging mechanism. That's fine. And
can I interrupt with a question?
Yeah,
or would you prefer me to keep until the end? I can do either. I was actually wanting to ask about your definition of an application. So typically applications are made up of many microservices, or at least more than one. So you seem to be implying that an application instance was kind of a VM, whereas in my mind, an application is a collection of lots of different, there may be microservices, as you say, or there may be something else, but lots of different things, and together those form an application. Is that consistent with your definition?
Yeah, that is consistent with definition. Yeah.
Okay, so we should try and avoid, I guess, things where like where the word application instance applies to a VM or a pod or something. because I'm not sure that it makes sense in that context.
So the application instances means, okay, if you have one application and they become running, so maybe in some cases it only has one application instance, that's fine. It's not saying they should always have a lot of instances or replicas. That's not the case. Actually, application instance is only a description of your application in the running status. So if it's running, and it will have several or only one or any number of application instances. That is the intention of the application instances.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, and maybe to add here, it's also not just the microservices. So we had the discussion the last time. It's also other things like, for example, security credentials and other bits and pieces that belong to an application, obviously.
Yes. Yes. It's not have to be microservices. Okay. So
should we consider rewording the KA part to more of a Helm in that case? Because I agree that it's kind of confusing. When the example that you mentioned about the K8, it's probably just a service which is exposed in the K8, doesn't need to be a full application at that point.
But Helm would be technology specific. So what if somebody's not using Helm? Would it just take Helm as an example there?
Yeah, we have examples about, what type of applications maybe you maybe want to use. Helm is one example, but you may just directly use Kubernetes YAML files, that's fine. Or you are using anything like, okay, you can actually use a Docker image to describe the application, that's fine.
Got it, yep.
I will just skip the rest of the concept because it's very straightforward to go to the layers of application delivery, because this is actually the guidelines we want to use if we want to evaluate a open source project about application delivery, or the whole life cycle of how to deploy application, how to deliver application in cloud native way. So, and I actually drew a very simple picture to show the concept here. So we basically have 4 layers during the whole life cycle of delivery application, and the 1, 2, 3 layers are actually the main concern of this SIG. The reason we are drawing this picture because actually we can go to the layers one by one. So the first layer, if we want to deliver application, is actually about how to describe the application. For example, somebody is using Helm, somebody is using Customize, somebody just using the Kubernetes YAML files. So somebody is using CNAP, that's all fine, because they are all application described in here. But as you can see that maybe those projects has also functionalities in other areas. So we will not use specific example here. We will not say Helm is application definition or customized application definition. It's not like that. So there are a lot of projects that they actually have functionalities that actually covers many aspects in this picture. So that's why we want to make it clear that what is a specific functionality belonging to. For example, in Helm, it has something called charts. And charts is a perfect example for application descriptor. And also another perfect example is Kubernetes YAML files. It's described what is in your application, what is your configuration for the application. But also we notice there are technologies that is used to do parametering or configuration. For example, Customize. We also have several DSLs. We also have several, for example, templating. Make them to configure application. It's also in the scope of application definition. And the application definition layer actually will give us a configuration or a description of how to run your application. So after that layer, we will have second layer, which is application deploy or route. That as long as we have the application, we will deliver the application to the platform, but we want to do that with strategy. So the second layer actually defines how we do the application lifecycle management, how to bootstrap the application, how to route the application. For example, with strategies like blue-green, with Canary, with any kinds of strategy, and also how to configure the source, the configure source-driven workflow. For example, GitOps. GitOps is a perfect example for how to trigger your application deployment route in a predefined strategies, which is stored in Git. It's also in the scope of the layer 2. So most of the functionalities of the application delivery project, like Spinnaker, like Tecton, they actually have functionalities in this layer. And the traditional CD system also focuses on this layer. But we should also pay attention to that we actually have the layer 3 after the layer 2. So I will explain this a little bit here because it's maybe kind of different from what we're thinking. So in layer 2, we are actually focused on the application level route. But I think you guys might notice that we also have something like the application instances level route. For example, you have application. That application is using a claim that it will use the Kubernetes deployment as workloads. That means it will use Kubernetes deployment to start these application instances. So first of all, we have the road strategy for the application level, like Canaro. That means I want to create the application first and then create a new version application instances as Canaro instance, and then trying to do A/B testing, to do benchmarking, and then promote all the instances to the production environment, and then delete the old version of the application. That's the Canaro deployment. But that is application level. But for the application instances level, we still have strategies which is defined by Kubernetes deployment. For example, the Kubernetes deployment will claim that
Looks like Harry's connection went somewhere. Let's give him a second to see if he comes back.
Yeah.
Connection has a case of the Wednesdays.
While we're waiting there, could I ask a quick question of the group? So I understood that included in the scope of this SIG is application development. And I'm sort of curious where this fits into the stack that's on the screen at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar around the testing and aspects of that development. I think this is a useful lens. I think it's also potentially missing. But I think that's useful to say then things are not in that diagram because we can add them or agree they're not. They shouldn't be. I agree that my view is that they should be. I think they're useful.
Another probably explicit call out that I'm missing in this is the security part of it. I do remember that in the previous conversation we did mention it, but it's missing in the diagram. Maybe it's too low level that we don't want to keep in the diagram.
I think it's a cross-cutting concern, so we don't have necessarily the cross-cutting bits and pieces in there.
I think
so overall, I have
implied there, as far as I can understand, configuration of security, deployment of security, infrastructure, etc. I think it's implicit.
The development, I agree. For the development, I think our agreement was as far as I remember, we don't talk about like development, like how do I write a microservice per se, but how do I structure a microservice-based application? That would actually be maybe part right now, mostly in the application definition piece from Harry's diagram.
Last I looked at the charter, it included PaaS and application development and IDEs and all of that stuff. If that's not the case, we should make it very clear because I'm pretty sure it's in the charter at the moment. I think it should be in there, and it seems like others might feel the same.
No, that's deleted actually because we try to focus on the part of application delivery.
Okay, so it's just a timing issue. It's not that it's it's just
I see it the same way. I think for us the important thing was really to start somewhere, and I actually think that this is really a good starting point because I really like the diagram. I like the layer diagram a lot because it separates different things. You might just argue how you slice and dice it, but overall, I think it's a good first structure that we can work with. It also separates us a bit from like something like SIG apps and the Kubernetes working groups, and has a nice definition in there. So for me, these layers are a good starting point. I think they might need some tweaking, maybe, but mostly on the naming side. But I find them useful, and I'd like to get like feedback from others whether you like generally think this is useful, this is in the right direction, and it's valuable.
Yes, I definitely do. I would be inclined to maybe put one layer on top there and say that that layer 0 application development is currently out of scope until we've, we're starting at the bottom of the stack basically, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think we can do that. So I don't see an issue there. I think my only comment is I would really give the layers actual layer names, which we have already, like application definition, deployment, rollout, instance automation, and platform related and platform per se. And yours is like the 0, the layer 0 piece on the development. Yeah, we can put this one on top, so we could modify it. But for me, this is a good starting point. I'd actually also like to put this maybe a bit more front and center. Like, this is how we see the world. That's really, I think, where we should have all an agreement that this is helpful, because it's the first real structuring of the work that we are doing here. So any other comments on this one? Everybody's silent right now.
Yeah, it sounds good.
I had one more comment. Sorry, I'm only just seeing this document for the first time. So layers 2 and 3 are fairly blurry to me. I'm looking at the diagram now and the descriptions. There's application lifecycle management.
There actually explanation here in layer 3. I just gave a clear example that how layer 2 and layer 3 are cooperating together. It's more like application level versus the application instance level.
Okay, maybe it's best if I'll just read through the document and put comments in there.
Yeah,
yeah.
You can see the example here. I think it's actually there the clear boundary between these two layers. Yeah, but I admit that the terminologies here, like application or application instances, are very confusing. But if you read the example, I think you can get a clear idea about that. And it's always welcome that if anybody can propose new naming for the terminologies here.
Yeah, I think that there's really good definition in there, and we should really look at this. But I think overall, so there, please give it another read. But I think this is really good progress here.
Sure, let's go to
and it might also help us with the initial steps around the landscape, because now we could actually try to fit tools into the different layers in which they should cover, which they cover. Obviously, some will span maybe multiples, but that would also be a good test for the tools that we have, whether the layer definition here helps us.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. So maybe this is something for the next meeting, to put some tools into this and see whether it actually works out for tools.
Yeah.
Or whether we see all tools in one layer, which more or less would mean that's kind of awkward.
I think the most common thing is that there are a lot of projects that maybe they're working across different layers.
Which I think is fine too.
Yeah.
But that would be the next step for me to put some tools in there and see how this works out. Because then I think we're also closer to the landscape definition. But I agree some tools might do it. Because another finding that we should have as part of this eventually is to give to provide some proposal to the CNCF if we see something like fundamentally missing that should be there. Yeah. And this should then also become obvious.
Exactly.
I do have one other quick comment. It kind of seems like things are getting closer to the platform layer as we go up, and it might make sense to maybe put like the platform layer as layer 1, and then as we go higher up in ordinals?
That is an interesting proposal. Yeah, because I think sometimes when we're talking about layer 0, we mean infrastructure layer, right?
Yeah, that it might be more. I agree. It might be more intuitive to do it. I'm just resharing here. It might be more intuitive to change this the other way around. Yeah. If you think about the OSI model, the lowest layer is actually 1 and not the highest. That's,
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree. Thank you. Yeah, another motivation that we want to, I think, define the layers, because I think it is actually, we can see the trend that people are trying to now using operator to deliver their applications. But if you are using operator to deliver application, you will notice that, okay, you actually have a layer 3 component, which is actually an operator. But you still need to have the layer 2 project to handle the application route for you. For example, how to route operator in the Canary way, right? That is actually into separate concepts there. So also you will notice that your application is described by CRD or some kind of non-building API of Kubernetes. So actually you will cover the 3 layers if you try to deploy application which is described by operator.
Yeah, and if, for example, look at other projects where you have the CRD would also be part of the application definition to some extent.
Yeah, kind of.
You can see that there are dependencies, which I think are fine, but that's why I think it's a good idea to define for like each of those, not for each, but at least for some of the projects that we see out there, like Helm and a couple of others, what we see them doing at the different layers.
Yeah.
I think the platform layer obviously is the one where they shouldn't be really doing a lot.
Yeah.
Well, the question with an operator is actually as they use the as the Kubernetes API, whether they are actually extensions to the platform or not. What if I implement a custom CLI? Is it an extension to the platform or not?
I think the point is that we will focus on, okay, the functionality could be provided by platform. It's make a lot of sense. But the functionality belonging to which layers? So it's like the networking model. Actually, all the components are in Linux kernel, right? But the different components may working on the different layers of the networking model. So it's also the same case for our layers here. So the functionalities could, I think most of the functionalities are provided by the platform or plugins of platform, right? But those functionalities actually working on different layers here. It's a logical layer. It's not the physical layer that you must have several projects working together. It's not like that. So even you are using Kubernetes itself, you have no other project at all. But a Kubernetes can still provide different functionalities in different layers. So that is, I think, the point of this diagram.
So I'm still confused as how will this account the network policies and probably the node affinities and things like that, because that goes into the platform level, but it's defined at the application level.
So that depending on what you're using those functionality to do what kind of purpose. For example, if you are just talking about the network policy, right, it's more like belonging to the platform layer. But if you're using, for example, the affinity functionality to do route strategies, then the route strategy itself definitely belonging to layer 2. But it's not saying that node affinity is a layer 2 functionality. The node affinity is still a functionality from the platform layer, but you could use this functionality to build a layer 2 functionality, which will belong to the route strategy part.
Okay, so in a way we are putting this like the platform, the layer 4 capabilities can be described or present in any of the layer above, but it won't be responsible for guaranteeing.
Yeah. The point is, what is it responsible for?
And it might even be a missing level of abstraction, because actually at the higher layers, you suddenly need to know a lot from the deeper layers. And one example there is that I see, especially if you deploy to multiple environments, if you suddenly have environment specifics at like a very high level, like the application definition layer, you might create dependencies that you even don't want to be there necessarily. So I might have like I'm not a developer of the application. They decided the individual components and so forth. but I'm not the one responsible necessarily for networking security, so I might not even be able to define this. If I already have to define it at my level, I'd have trouble because it might not even be my responsibility, and nor do I have the knowledge to even define these things. If, however, a certain tool requires me to define them at a higher level, then I would be in trouble, maybe, if it makes any sense.
Yeah, we've come across similar concerns in the multi-cluster environment. There are often, and this relates to policies in general. I think there are policies that are implemented by the application definition layer. So things like, my application has to be, financial standard XYZ compliant, and that's actually typically in the application definition. They know that this is a credit card application and it needs to be, Sarbanes-Oxley compliant or whatever that may be. But then, further down, the infrastructure people might have policies that say we separate, production workloads from test workloads on a different network, and the application developers and definition people don't know or care about that. And then what you end up having to do is kind of merge these policies at some layer there, typically, lower down in the stack, so that the end result, the final deployment fulfills all of these policies.
Yeah, I think that's even easier examples for me. It's the application definition. I might just define which services I'm using, but I might not necessarily care about replica accounts because I don't know which environment it's deployed to. So replica accounts might come in later because depending whether this is a test environment or a production environment, replica accounts will be different.
Yeah,
that's application definition layer. I wouldn't even define this, but still, if you look at it, it's kind of also separated. If you look at how you can write about applications, but that's why I like that model. It makes it very explicit. What do I need to define where? Does it really make sense to be defined at that level? And can I also split these concerns properly when deploying an application?
Yeah, I agree. Something else that, sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's actually important that we take into account that you can implement different capabilities or different sorts of configuration, like if we take number of replicas as an example, at different layers. So you might start out specifying a replica count for individual environments at the application deploy and rollout layer for each environment that you deploy to, but then you might switch to implementing it at the application instance automation operation layer if you switch to horizontal pod autoscalers in Kubernetes, for example, and you get that benefit out of the capabilities of the platform or of higher level APIs built on the platform. Same thing for blue-green rollout strategies. You could potentially use like a CRD to implement blue-green deployments, and then have a declarative application definition that uses that CRD, and you're no longer orchestrating rollouts at the application deploy and rollout layer. You're doing it you're pushing that responsibility down lower.
Yeah, but for example, with blue-green, I think blue-green is a great example here because there's no definition right now how you would specify that something is even a blue-green deployment. So if you would write it down in Helm charts and maybe Istio routes and stuff, you would know that it's a blue-green, but it's nowhere explicitly defined that this is currently a blue-green deployment.
Right.
So what's the blue and the green part? I think that's, you would have to like be at that meta level to even understand what these things mean.
I think it actually might make sense to have a application deployment workflow layer that's a level up from declarative application definition. And then that's where you would put today you might have a blue-green deployment strategy, say defined in Spinnaker, which would be orchestrating multiple instances that are declaratively described by a Helm chart or by a set of Kubernetes manifests. But then in the future, what I'm saying is that responsibility might be moved out of the workflow layer and down to the like a Kubernetes operator, and then exposed as a CRD that's declarative and then just part of the normal application definition layer.
Jacob, I have a different understanding from you. It might be worth clarifying in case other people have a similar confusion. So you seem to be thinking of an orchestration layer above what is labeled as layer 1 in the diagram. Is that right? Like,
yes, basically I'm thinking layer 2 and layer 1 it might make sense to swap them.
So yeah, I think we need to be, I think the way it is to me makes more sense than what you're describing. But I think it'd be worth making sure that we know what order those layers are in so that people don't get confused. One could probably argue it both ways, but the way it is diagrammed at the moment seems to make sense to me. Flipping it around makes it more confusing.
I guess where would we think that tooling like Spinnaker or Tecton would fit in?
Layer 2, my understanding.
Right, and then it would, but each Spinnaker stage or Tecton task would be ultimately like doing a kubectl apply, for example, right, of some declarative application definition.
Correct.
So my personal idea is that, you know, the timing of the functionality that happens is not actually what the diagram is trying to show to the readers, because yeah, as you mentioned, that application definition may happen in the workflow of Spinnaker at the very last stage. But I think it's more like we were trying to illustrate that to readers that what you need to have before you take a action. For example, you need to have application descriptor before you deploy application. Then you need to have a project to handle the application definition, to take actions to deploy the application. And then you will have another component which handle the bootstrap or lifecycle management for the application instances. And then you, of course, all the functionality may be provided by a platform there. So I think timing is not very critical criteria in this diagram, but the logic in your mind is actually what matters here.
I wonder if this is an interesting question in my mind that this raises, and it probably has bearing on the previous question around what order the layers are in. One could adopt the approach that we would like these layers to be kind of interchangeable, if I can, or maybe that's not the right word, but an application descriptor might be independent of whether Helm is going to deploy it or not. It may be a sort of a standard application descriptor, which could then be deployed by any number of different things in the lower layers. And similarly for Kubernetes, like everything in layer 1 and 2, and even lower down potentially could be totally independent of whether it's Kubernetes that's deploying the stuff or not at the platform layer. Or we could adopt the approach that typically these tools are so tightly integrated that, you know, by definition, your application definitions are going to have Kubernetes specific things in them, and therefore are not portable to things other than Kubernetes. And that may be where the sort of Spinnaker example started getting confusing. Maybe the application definition is kind of contained in the Spinnaker definition at the moment, the Spinnaker config. And I'm not a Spinnaker expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm guessing here. And maybe that's where some of the confusion's coming in. So is that worth talking about, whether we think these layers should be kind of, the higher layers should be independent of the implementations of the lower layers or not?
It should be independent. Actually, all the layers, they're actually cooperated together, but they are fully coupled with each other.
I would say that it's a detail of, like, because you can build things that are very composable and you can build things that are very tightly coupled, and there are pros and cons to both approaches. So having something that does end-to-end one thing in a very opinionated way and provides a high-level abstraction, like Cloud Foundry, is one approach. Having something that's nearly the opposite approach, that's very like layered and very like separate concerns, like Kubernetes built out of bits and Helm and the other things, like both of those two are valid. You can apply this model, but in some cases, a single stack might say, I own all these layers.
Yeah.
And in others, you might say, well, no, like it's much more componentized.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a flaw. I think, but it is worth observing. I also don't think we should say categorically, these are always separate because it's an implementation detail of whatever platform.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's reasonable. Yeah.
Automation in that part, actually, it should be possible. A project that covers all the layers, of course, that should be possible. But it's also possible that you have maybe 4 or 2 projects to work together to do an application delivery. That's all the cases that makes sense.
Yeah, I would still maybe if it's still for, as an example, stick to Kubernetes and also other CNCF projects that we are related with. We could fit them into this model. Like they're not taking all the tools, but we had also in the list when we wrote the charter where they would fit in there. Like standard components and other stuff would be helpful.
Yeah, it would be a good test of, like it would be a good test of it. It would also be a useful observational exercise of like, oh yeah, there isn't anything over here. What is it we're all using in this space that doesn't exist in that ecosystem?
Or even say that, like with the Spinnaker example, okay, which is CDF, but we shouldn't care whether it's CDF or not. Really, where is the explicit definition, and what does my explicit definition of a blue-green deployment look like? And who has specified this usually? And can I use the high-level definition and work with this, or do I have to like redo it? Because and then also like integrating it with things like GitOps. Because like one example, just had a discussion the other day where somebody said, well, whenever an image gets pushed, I'm triggering a new blue-green deployment of that image where everything more or less gets rewritten by a higher layer. So in this case, like that, more or less the rollout strategy overrides everything else.
So I think actually you actually this is a very important point, because from my point of view, that for example the policy or definition of the strategies of the lower layers should be part of the application definition. For example, your blue-green deployment strategies, the definition of that part should be part of the application definition. Right now, it's maybe not the case, but I think that's the way to go, because in your application descriptions, you may want to have the strategies of how to roll to that part of your application.
Just a quick note. There's a lot going on here. I want to suggest 2 things. One, that we kind of table this for right now, because there's at least one more issue on the agenda that we want to get to, and also there seems to be confusion. So let's take to mailing list and comments and Slack to work this out, just temporarily at least.
Yeah, makes sense.
Let's go on with the agenda. We have still several items to talk about.
Yes. Yeah. So, next item. Actually, the next item is Alice and Harry want to talk about.
This is the KubeCon proposals, session proposals. I have to admit, I didn't have any time yet to write them. I'll have to do it right now. I'll send out the note. But one will be like really general group introduction. And the bigger discussion is, I think, really what do we want the second one to be about? One should really be introducing to the work of the group and what we should, and what it's doing so that people are up to speed, understand the charter and so forth. And then the second one could be more like of a workshop. And as I haven't written it, because I'm also opening up to the group, would like the whole application definition, the dictionary, maybe be something to discuss with a wider audience and to put this into the second session?
I'd agree with that. I think this could be useful whenever we get to the point where it's very clear and there's some agreement behind it, and presenting it at KubeCon would be a great idea.
If we've got a sense of the number of people we might have in the room, like something with like walls and Post-its would be amazing. Like, in terms of, we have this model, where do you think things fit? Like put your favorite projects on the board type things. Like getting but it depends on how many people we think might, like what size room we've got and how many people we might get coming along.
Yeah, maybe we can go find someone who's running KubeCon and they can answer that question.
Probably really unclear right now. Right now, we have roughly, I think, 10,000 people to 12,000 people. So you will have some people in the room. I can't tell you how many.
Yeah.
More how big the room is. Because if the room fits 10,000 people, we're in trouble.
I will find that out fairly soon. I'm actually going to go for it right now.
But I would generally, if we can have something like a virtual whiteboard, it still might make more sense when people put stuff there. I'm not against physical devices per se, but usually online versions might scale a bit better.
All right.
The tactile nature of things is it gets people putting things up, and you could do it. We could have multiple copies of it and then aggregate them afterwards.
Okay, but the overall agreement, we see that how projects fit in there, and they have the dictionary and the discussion as the working session, and the first one is just introduction to the charter, things we work on, why do we exist, general questions. So I will then really promise to write this up. Luckily, I have to spend some time at the airport tomorrow, and this time I'll really do it. But just coming back on Sunday, I didn't find the time to. And I'll share it then on the mailing list.
All right. So right now, are we at the last bullet point? Because this is the one I wanted to get to, because it's a kind of important one for this meeting, for this slide itself. So Quentin raises that there are a lot of CNCF SIG meetings right now. And in the back channel, worked out that one possibility, one thing we could do is we could actually change weeks, keep the same time, but move it to the first and the third week rather than the second and the fourth week. And I looked on and I had the calendar checked, and it seems to be open right now.
Yes, it's totally, well, it looks open,
Yeah.
I'm fine, I mean.
Certainly I can make this time, but that one would be easier.
All right, well, to keep Garrett happy, we should move it then.
Yes.
Harry, what do you say?
I agree, yeah.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and get that taken care of then. Thanks for raising it, Quentin. We want to make sure that it's convenient for more people. But if anyone else has any comments, just please let us know.
Yeah, maybe just briefly send out a quick email on the mailing list if anybody has an issue with this, which I don't assume.
Yeah, actually, I'll get that email sent out. I'll get that email sent out. All right. This meeting only goes till 10 till the top of the hour, so we have 2 more minutes.
I do, by the way, also weird. Is there a reason why we started?
I don't know why it does that.
Oh, it's because my calendar is set like that. I haven't been able to give 10 minutes in between things. So I'm perfectly happy to be able to change this as we move forward. It's just kind of nice to be able to, I don't know.
Okay, if it no, I think it's fine. If it was a deliberate decision, I'm totally good with it.
It's not as deliberate as you think it is.
All right. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that we covered, Mark from Verizon. I don't know if Mark's even here, but I do want to make sure that he's able to present. So we'll need to reach out and see if we can get him on the for next time.
Yeah, that's also a minor comment because I had the name taken down as a comment in the last agenda, and I have to figure it out. It might not be Mark. It was just what I thought it was because it was the only one from Verizon that was in the attendee list, but I have to look at the old closed comments again.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, today was a pretty lively discussion. I'm so happy to see that there's so much interaction around this dictionary and good emphasis to get it all right and clear. So until next time, actually, we need to figure out what the next date will be, but we'll do that offline. So
I think we can do that offline.
Yeah, we'll do that offline. All right. Well, with that, I guess it's we're all done. So thanks for showing up, everyone. Unless someone else has something to say.
Good to see all of you.
Okay, thanks, man.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Sounds good. Talk to you later. Bye.
All right, and thank you.